This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to talk about Bitcoin, dictators, and decentralized government. This is a follow-up to yesterday's video in which I discussed Bitcoin, the IMF, and El Salvador. And in that video I called Nayib Bukele, the president of El Salvador, I called him a benevolent dictator, which got quite a few responses like this one from Vegan Warrior. Bukele is a dictator, you sound clueless. He was elected twice. Shaking my head. Calling Bukele a benevolent dictator, I certainly did not mean to imply any sort of political illegitimacy. Bukele is clearly loved and respected by most Salvadorans inside and outside of El Salvador. He really embodies the quote-unquote will of the people like virtually no leader in the West. I think Bukele, as he portrays himself, harkens back to a sort of Platonic philosopher king, highly educated, physically fit, self-aware, possesses wisdom, knowledge of philosophy. Bukele really is the polar opposite of the sort of stupid, weak, beta male managerial types who govern in the West. This is Bukele. This is what we're stuck with in the West. That being said, there's a problem with highly centralized forms of government like absolute monarchy, evil dictator, benevolent dictator, whatever kind of dictator, supreme leader, tyrannos, as the Greeks or Plato would have called them. The most obvious problem with this kind of political system is the problem with the single point of failure. If the CIA or IMF, for example, decides to take out Bukele, heaven forbid, it's not clear how the El Salvador experiment will continue. I'm sure that Bukele has wise succession plans, and I know that he has smart advisors, but this is not a robust, decentralized system. At least it doesn't appear to be to me. If the Salvadoran people, though, begin to live and breathe Bukele's values, then there is some hope that the system can continue and the country can continue on the same path after his passing. Monarchy always has had this succession problem. A wise and good king usually has an heir who's drunk and deviant and unfit for office, sort of like the Hunter Biden of the family. Or he has two sons, one of whom murders the other after the king's death. Monarchy frequently devolves into civil war. Like in the Old Testament, we have Jeroboam's revolt, which followed after the death of King Solomon and split the country into two kingdoms, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. If you're enjoying this video so far, I just ask you to help to support this channel. Hit the subscribe button. That really helps with the algorithm. Leave a like, comment, question, suggestion for a future video, and share this video with a friend or family member. Like many men, I think, I've always been drawn to monarchy and its aesthetics. These kind of aesthetics, I think, are definitely at least coming back even to the modern world. But I think that decentralized systems of governance are ultimately better and more stable. In these systems, power is dispersed across many different entities. For example, in the US, we have the three branches of government: executive branch, legislative branch, and judicial branch. We have the 50 states and their states' rights. We have a constitution that attempts to stop voters from voting away their basic human rights to free speech, tools of self-defense, etc. It's a much more robust system, I believe, than El Salvador has. And we also have the Lindy effect, fortunately, in the US too. Been around for a while. Now this system, this American system, is still subject to capture. You can stack the Supreme Court or threaten them like FDR did when he controlled all three branches of government and stole Americans' gold in 1933 and 1934. You can expand the executive branch beyond the founders' intentions, which is what has happened over the past 50 years, so that unelected bureaucrats think they know what's best for us when it comes to food and energy consumption and medical treatments and money. But this system, this American system, is still fairly robust and resists tyranny, as we saw, for example, when the court struck down Biden's intended vaccine mandates, for example. Sometimes the process takes a while, but it does end up working out. At least we hope it continues to work out. And El Salvador doesn't have these same kinds of checks and balances, but rather must rely on the continued goodwill and wisdom of Bukele, which, to be fair, he has much of. Max Kaiser posted this poll a couple months ago saying, independent broadcasters, El Salvador is a free speech zone. Why not move here? You'll never get hassled for exercising free speech. I asked him in the replies, would I be allowed to criticize Bukele or any of his policies without fear of repercussion if broadcasting from within El Salvador? For the record, I think he's doing an amazing job so far. I never got an answer to that, but I think there are obviously limits to free speech in a small country like this. And if I were Bukele, I would probably not tolerate speech that was trying to overthrow me or criticize me too heavily. Ultimately, in the same way, the U.S. Constitution is only as good as the American people. dumb and or evil Americans can and will try to change the system to hamstring our rights to free speech and self-defense, among other basic rights. In fact, there seems to be a coordinated attack on free speech being pushed by the mainstream media today. You see articles like this in The Atlantic, in the New York Times, in the New Yorker. Elections are bad for democracy. The First Amendment is out of control. The Constitution is sacred. Is it also dangerous? One of the biggest threats to America's politics might be the country's founding documents. Hard to imagine these things being published so openly. And then we have American traitors like John Kerry saying in this tweet, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to hammer, quote unquote, disinformation out of existence. In other words, information that's true that the government doesn't like. If it wasn't true, they wouldn't be worried about it. Our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to hammer disinformation or misinformation out of existence. What we need is to win the right to govern by hopefully winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement changes. So he's obviously talking about doing some constitutional amendment or some way of hamstringing free speech. We have Hillary Clinton saying the same thing as well, that platforms like X should lose the protections they have under Section 230, where they are currently not being held liable for anything that's said on their platform. It's very hard to police the free speech of hundreds of millions of people, and it's unfair to ask a corporation to do this. And the problem with that too is you don't end up with free speech then. You have one person deciding what's okay speech and what's not okay speech. I think Ron Paul sums it up well in this tweet, as he often does. For over 100 years, the U.S. government tolerated freedom of speech because they virtually controlled the information that Americans received, whether it be from the government-controlled schools or from watching one of the handful of licensed TV stations. This was certainly how it was when I was growing up, just three or four main channels. All Americans consume the same prepackaged narratives. There is no threat to the government from Americans speaking freely as long as the narratives were controlled, but that monopoly has been shattered with the internet, and it's also been shattered, obviously, with Bitcoin. Fortunately, we now also have these decentralized tools, this freedom tech, that can be used to protect basic human rights like free speech and self-defense. And we're really the last country in the world that has these sort of basic human rights like free speech and self-defense, with the exception of maybe call it the Czech Republic, maybe Switzerland, for example. But fortunately, we now have this freedom tech as well that can back us up. We have Bitcoin, which is freedom money. We have Nostr, which is the free speech protocol, sort of a decentralized Twitter that no one can control. We have 3D printers, and you know what I'm talking about when I'm referring to those. These tools will continue to protect us even if the tyranny of the majority succeeds in taking away our legal protections and even our constitutional protections. That being said, it would also be nice to be able to elect a president who's not actively and openly attacking the Constitution before they're even elected, as Kamala is doing. Just because you legally possess a gun in the sanctity of your locked home doesn't mean we're not going to walk into that home and check to see if you're being responsible. It looks like she's standing here next to Gavin Newsom, which is what you would expect. If you don't know that much about Nostr, I'll put a link in the description notes below to this video about unstoppable money, which is Bitcoin, and unstoppable free speech, which is the Nostr protocol. You could also follow me on Nostr. I'll put a link to this in the description notes below. You can access Nostr through many different clients like Amethyst and Primal and Damus. Here is a sort of a web version of it, but the important thing, the only thing you really need is my NPub, which we can see up here. I'll also put a link to this in the description notes below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video, and let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.